Number 6, Gerald Ford.
By the time Ford took office, the U.S. economy had entered into a period of stagflation, which economists attributed to various causes, like the 1973 oil crisis and increasing competition from countries such as Japan. Traditionally, economic remedies for dismissal economic growth rates such as tax cuts and increased spending risked exacerbating the inflation. The conventional response to inflation, tax increase and cut in the government spending, risk damaging the economy. Domestically, Ford presided over the worst economy in the 4 decades since the Great Depression, with growth, inflation, and a recession during his tenure. Shortly after taking office, Ford pardoned Nixon for any crimes he may have committed as the president. The president pardon meant that Nixon would have never faced any criminal charges for his involvement in the Watergate scandal. Ford's decision generated world controversy. Millions of Americans wanted to see the disgrace of the former president brought to justice. Some critics charged Ford and issued the pardon as part of a pre-engaged deal to reach the Oval Office. But Ford insisted that the nation's future hinged on the ending ordeal of the Watergate, beginning with the process of healing. What do you think? Crisis. In the Southeast Asian refugee crisis of 1975, with the fall of the South Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos to the communists, millions of those nations' citizens fled their new dictatorship. Accusation, President General Ford organized an emergency military effort to evacuate the refugees to the U.S. American civil society also answered the call, assisting refugees' resettlement in countless ways. Churches, synagogues, military families, and civil groups petitioned to sponsor evacuees, while the nonprofit International Rescue Committee coordinated an effort. Within days of their arrival on American shores, refugees were placed with sponsors throughout the nation, generous and capable. American civil society helped cultivate new and proud Americans. One of these refugees, Joseph Sao, recently represented New Orleans in the U.S. Congress.
Our 7th president would be Richard Nixon. For foreign policy, he visited Beijing, setting in motion normalization of relations with the People's Republic of China. In May, he traveled to the Soviet Union and signed the agreements that contained the results of the first Strategic Arms Limitations Treaty talks, and new negotiations were begun to extend further arms control and disarmament measures. These developments marked the beginning of the period of détente, in line with the general tendency among Americans to favor a lower profile in world affairs after the Vietnam War, which finally ended in 1975 with the last withdrawal of U.S. personnel. While improvements in relations with the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China signaled a possible thaw in the Cold War, they did not lead to general improvement in the international climate. The Watergate scandal was a major political scandal that occurred in the United States during 1972 and 1974, following a break-in by 5 men at the Democratic National Committee, headquarters at the Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C. On June 17, 1972, the President Richard Nixon administration's subsequent attempt to cover up his involvement, after the 5 burglars were caught in the conspiracy, was discovered chiefly through the work of a few journalists, congressional staffers, and an election finance watchdog official. Watergate was investigated by the United States Congress. Meanwhile, Nixon's administration resisted its probes, which led to a constitutional crisis. Nixon inherited a weak economy from President Lyndon B. Johnson. In 1969, a tax bill passed that held several of Nixon's ideas, including a repeal of the investment tax credit and removal of 2 million of the nation's poor from the tax rolls. After a year, it was becoming obvious that the plan wasn't working. Nixon gave his budget plan to Congress in 1971, in which he was to use $11.6 billion deficit. Nixon then publicly agreed to the Keynesian economic principles, which stated that the government expenditure could take the nation out of their recession, which was a considerably unusual view for a Republican president.
Number 8, George W. Bush.
Economy. Bush took office during a period of economic recession in the wake of the bursting of the dot-com bubble. but terrorist attacks also impacted the economy. His administration increased federal government spending from 1.789 trillion to 200.983 trillion, while revenues increased from 2.25 trillion to 524 trillion from 2000 to 2008. Individual income revenues increased 14%, and corporate tax revenues increased 50%. Scandals. In July 2005, Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney, respective chief political advisors Karl Rove and Louis Scooter Libby, came under fire for revealing the identity of a covert Central Agency agent, Valerie Plame, to reports in the CIA leak scandal. Plame's husband, Joseph C. Wilson, had challenged Bush's assertion that Hussein had sought to obtain uranium from Africa, and a special prosecutor was tasked with determining whether administration officials had leaked Plame's identity and retribution against Wilson. Libby resigned on October 2028, hours after his indictment of a grand jury on multiple counts of perjury, false statement, and obstruction in the case. Domestic affair. After 9/11, the terror attack, President George W. Bush was able to win a broad mandate in the act of the nation's defense. In his speech on September 20th, he asked citizens to be calm and resolute, even in the face of continuing threat, and promised that the United States would triumph over terrorism, stop it, eliminate it, destroy it where it grows. After the United States began military operations in Afghanistan in October, the president's approval rating soared to 90%. Congressional leaders responded too. They passed a $40 billion disaster relief bill in September, and the next year the USA Patriot Act, which gave investigators a great deal of leeway in their domestic surveillance activities and made immigration laws more stringent.
Our last president will be Donald Trump. Bills to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as the Obamacare, did not pass Congress in mid-2017. However, Trump's tax reform plan was signed into law in December 2017, which included the substantial tax cuts for higher-income taxpayers and corporations, as well as repeal of a key Obamacare element. The individual mandate of the Joint Committee on Taxation reported that the new tax law would slightly increase the size of the economy by 0.7% total over a decade. During the 2016 presidential campaign, 15 women claimed to have been sexually assaulted by Trump, going on the record to accuse him of groping them in planes, offices, hotels, and even golf and tennis tournaments. The then presidential nominee vehemently denied any accounts of misconduct and suggested that women weren't attractive enough to merit his attention. Donald Trump definitely has bad communication skills, as in the time he has been in his administration, he has picked many fights with allies, buttered up dictators, accelerated a nascent trade war, and created purely for the sake of cruelty and cynical political leverage a humanitarian disaster on our border with Mexico. He's also used his Twitter account to undermine the rule of law in hopes that he will save him from prosecution.